Hey guys, it's Faye from Solar Flow, and I am back with an all-new video. Today's topic is a deep dive behind the veil psychic energy read into the true history and origins of tarot cards. So we are going to be exploring when the inspiration first hit for them and with whom, and what were those cards originally used for. And if you yourself are into spiritual and mystical properties, this video is for you. Into the energy reading and the goods that the guides have brought about tarot cards, we're going to begin by exploring some 3D information that was acquired off of Google about tarot cards. Tarot cards is a deck of 78 cards used for divination, self-reflection, and spiritual exploration. Tarot cards are often used to gain insights into the past, present, or potential future, and each card has a unique symbol, image, and meaning. Now, the so-called history of tarot is that tarot decks originated in Italy, please keep this in mind, in the 1430s. They were initially used for games, or so Google says, and later became associated with fortune telling. There are countless variations of tarot cards, often categorized by theme, artwork, or even intended use. However, all tarot decks comprise the same reading layouts. Now that concludes the 3D information share on tarot. And before we get into the energy reading on tarot cards, if you have not yet clicked the subscribe button and you are into this kind of spiritual exploration, I invite you to please subscribe and also go ahead and smash that like button down below. Now here we go. The energy reading into the true history and origins of tarot. Now, the reason I am highlighting the fact that it is the true history and origins of tarot is because the understanding of where tarot came from is both incomplete and out of order. And that is what we are going to be exploring in this energy reading as a whole. So it's going to be, in fact, the order in which tarot cards came to be, as well as where and when it came to be. Because, as Marie Antoinette has shared with us in a previous video, history does not always get it correctly. And that's why we have energy readers. So here we go. Energy reading into the true history and origin of tarot cards. Tarot for divination originated not in Italy and not in the 1400s, but in fact with Middle Eastern gypsies and as far back as the 1200s. But it was kept deeply underground for a couple of hundred years yet, and it was only used initially by those in the know. And what was the inspiration for it? Well, it was inspired by a group of gypsies sitting around one night in the communal tent and smoking hookah around a fire. One truly deeply gifted one, and as I think we are starting to see in a lot of the videos and topics that I am covering, it's always one truly deeply gifted one that makes some sort of a large contribution into the world. had a flash of inspiration and went with it. He sat up, reached for some sort of a utensil, and started making rough drawings and pictures in the sand, and then boxed them in by creating a line around those images and representations. And guess what? Once these images were boxed in, they resembled cards. And once that deeply gifted gypsy sat up and started doing this, the rest of the other gypsies in the tent sat up and started to take notice as well. And they started to then weigh in on the energy and what they thought the energy in those images represented. They discussed it deep into the night, but because they were a band of gypsy traveling merchants, they did not have paper to jot down the images that he had first created in the sand. But as soon as they arrived at the next trading post, one did acquire paper, and the next opportunity that they had sitting around their tent at night, they started to create actual three-dimensional cards. However, these gypsies were not particularly artistic. So the initial drawings on the cards were a rough representation of what the cards would later grow to be. However, one of the gypsy's daughters was more creative, and the cards then became more polished in time under the auspices of her actual artistic endeavors. And it was at this time then that the cards started to take shape and started to come together. But even though these gypsies now had cards, they didn't entirely know what to do with them. But there was something there. They could feel it, and they knew it. So one could then say these traveling merchants and gypsies were plugged in to an energy behind the veil. Now, the reason they could feel like there was something there is because this is a group of traveling gypsies. They are all merchants. They stop at trading posts and they see a lot of different kinds of people. They interact with a lot of different kinds of people. So because they spent so much time around other people, they got really good at reading people. One could in fact even say they got really good at reading the energy of other people. But it was also more than that. They spent time with one another, traveling around with this group of gypsies. They looked out for one another, as well as their families. So even outside of spending a lot of time around a lot of other different kinds of people and a lot of other different kinds of energies, they were primarily traveling with each other and spending a lot of time with each other. So they really trusted one another as well as themselves. And that is then why when that first original gypsy had sat up in the tent and started making rough representations and drawings in the sand, the other gypsies that were sitting around in the tent sat up and really took notice of what it is that he was doing. As in, they traveled together, they cared for each other, and they supported each other. So when he sat up, they took notice. But also, outside of them taking notice and wanting to support one of their own, they all felt deeply that there was something here and that there was some sort of an energy that was trying to come through, and that was endorsement enough for them. So now, looking at it through the lens of them being plugged in, it's actually, in fact, that they were all plugged in to their gifts and abilities, most specifically, claircognizance. So now we understand this is a group of gifted merchants that happen to have been Middle Eastern gypsies that were playing around with tarot cards in their tent at night. And they were assigning different meaning and energetic representations to the cards. Now, they had found that they were, in fact, most inspired to play with the cards at the end of the day, when they were sated from their evening meal and having smoked their hookah, when they were, in fact, most energetically opened. They shuffled the cards and they would ask questions of the cards and allow the cards to answer their questions. Some of the questions, especially early on, were like basic bitch yes or no questions. Like, will we have trading success at the next market we stop at? But it wasn't all strictly yes or no questions, but questions that may have in fact also been a bit nebulous. So just like tarot readers do now, where they ask a clarifying question, they would ask clarifying questions even back then. Now, it was shown to me that back then they were not yet using layouts, but even just asking the cards questions would work and they would receive answers because the cards represented an energy from the other side. Because the cards themselves was inspiration that was received from the other side. So the cards themselves were the perfect marriage of divine inspiration that was received in the 5D spiritual realm and man's action in bringing that inspiration down into the 3D physical realm. So this is to say that when any of us receive inspiration, for all we know, it is in fact divine inspiration that we ourselves, through our own clear cognizance, are receiving downloads. So next time we receive some inspiration, perhaps it's an invitation for us ourselves to bring that energy down into the world and to create with it. Because this is certainly the case of what had happened here. Inspiration was received, and that first gifted gypsy acted on it. He brought the inspiration down into the 3D physical world and created tarot cards, something that has lasted hundreds of years. So this is to say that we ourselves, when we are bringing something into the world, no matter how insignificant in that moment it may appear to be, we don't in fact know what the long-term longevity of something is. But back to this first original caravan of traveling gypsies. So it started off with them creating the cards and then playing around with them in the tent at night. Asking questions, sometimes asking a clarifying question, but receiving answers. So look at it this way. It was at this point they had a proof of concept. They played with the cards, they were asking it pointed and specific questions, sometimes asking a clarifying question, but they were discovering that they were in fact getting answers, but more specifically, they were getting answers that resonated to the questions that they had asked. So it was at this time that I was shown this first group of traveling gypsies would settle down at a water hole in the desert, or perhaps even a natural hot springs, where they would offer readings to some other traveling gypsy bands as well. Now, because it was still early on and word had not yet spread, they were not charging or even thinking about charging for the readings. It was more done with the intention of offering some sort of a trade or a barter. So perhaps this other group of traveling merchants had a grain that they wanted. They would offer to do a reading in exchange for this grain. But they also had told them, let's first do the reading. If you think there is value here, then after the reading, you can in fact give us the grain. And what were those questions that were asked of the cards by the other traveling merchants? Well, there were a lot of fertility and health-related questions, as well as if they would have success at the next market that they would go to. Because when you were a band of traveling gypsies reading for other traveling merchants and gypsies, these were in fact the most pressing issues that they were facing: health and trading relating questions. So this was the first generation of the tarot cards. It was the very, very first group of gypsies that created the cards and initially read for one another, and then they started bartering and offering trades to other traveling merchants and gypsies as well. So you may then be wondering, how did tarot in fact begin to spread, and how did we get from there to here? Well, if that was the first generation of tarot, it began to truly spread and grow legs by the second generation. As in, the tarot cards were passed down from generation to generation. And that is because the daughters of the merchants that had the first deck of tarot cards married into another clan. And as happened at that time, the daughters tended to join the clan of their new husband. They didn't stay with the father's clan, they moved in with the new clan. So now it wasn't just one clan that had tarot cards, but it was multiple. Now it was shown to me that the first tarot deck only had 12 cards, but as those daughters of the first generation of the tarot deck card holders married into another clan and moved in with their husband's clan, the number of cards began to expand as well. And that is because each subsequent clan that now had their own tarot deck began to include cards that were meaningful and significant to that particular clan. Now also, because it was the daughters that had the cards and not just the first group of fathers that had created them, the girls now started to utilize their own intuition with the advent of the new clan cards that were added to their one particular deck. And because each clan now had their own deck with their own daughters and their gifts and abilities and their own intuition, those girls now started to infuse their gifts and abilities and their intuition into the readings that they offered. So let's say one reader was particularly gifted in healing, and her clan also happened to specialize in trading various different herbs and tonics. So when she was offering a reading to a person, she could combine her natural inherent gifts and abilities towards healing with various different herbs that that clan also offered. And since a lot of the questions the readers first were receiving back then were health-related questions, as well as questions about how or when a woman might conceive, well, that actually combined with different herbs that were being given to this woman, women were in fact becoming pregnant at that time, and people's various different ailments were starting to be healed as well. So word really began to spread at that point, and now tarot cards was no longer something that was just offered to other traveling merchants and caravans, but in fact was starting to be offered at different markets and trading posts that those traveling bands of gypsies would stop in. Now, because this was already the second generation of card holders, and these girls were now infusing their readings with their own particular blend of gifts and abilities, and there were real results and healing that was happening, word did spread. So word spread, and these readers were now no longer just reading for each other, but were in fact having people waiting for them at the markets that they would then next arrive to. This is when tarot really, in fact, began to take off and spread out of the Middle East. And it was shown to me that around the 1400s, it reached Italy. Now, I'm going to put a pin right here and I'm going to pause the channeled information because I'm going to remind you what I had actually disclosed at the top of the video when I was looking into the 3D information, which was that, according to history, tarot decks had originated in Italy in 1430. So perhaps hearing this, one might think I had not in fact channeled the information, but simply had Googled the history of tarot and then created some sort of narrative to fit the 3D information of what's available on the internet. I'm in fact going to share with you that as an energy reader, for me myself, this was an aha moment. Because as an energy reader, I do not always receive confirmation on the goods that the guides bring. I just trust my guides implicitly. But it is in fact nice when I get three-dimensional confirmation to the goods that my guides have brought to me. Now, in case you're also wondering, do I have integrity or am I just making all of this shit up? I'm going to share with you guys, I channeled this information back on April 25th, 2025. And I only looked up the 3D information on this last night when I knew I was going to record this video today. And we're already in May. So if you yourself are new here and you're watching and you're wondering, can I trust this chick? You can trust this chick. And if you are one of my longtime viewers and ostensibly you know you can trust the goods that the guides bring, you can in fact comment down below and you can assure any other new viewer that is here, not only does Faye have integrity, but you can trust the goods that her guides bring. Okay, now back to the channeled information. So yes, it was shown to me when I had looked into tarot back on April 25th, 2025, that it was in fact around the 1400s that tarot spread from the Middle East and into Europe, and the first European location it had reached was Italy. Now, at the time that it first reached Italy, it was shown to me as being both avant-garde and a bit of an anomaly. And it did not truly begin to take off for a couple of years further afterwards. So it spread from the Middle East because real results were happening. Women were waiting in the trading posts to have their cards read, and since it was a trading post, it was other traders that they were reading for. So those other traders were now moving on and about the continent that they were in. They were offering their own goods to other people in other trading posts, and yeah, word spread. So at this time, there were merchants from around other parts of Europe that were initially being exposed to tarot cards. And these traveling merchants would go back home to their wives and their families, and they would tell them about this new thing called tarot. And the wives were intrigued. So when the husbands next left wherever they were from to go back to the trading post, they were going with questions from their own wives. But even though the wives may have been curious about it and were sending questions along to their husbands to ask, it was still primarily at this time seen as a traveler's thing. As in, it was viewed the way that we ourselves, if we were not in the know, might look at a psychic in a psychic shop. So, as in, not legit. And it was someone that was reading you, the person asking the question, as much as they were supposedly reading the crystal ball and telling you something general enough that maybe it could fit something in that person's life. So basically, for entertainment purposes only. But here's the thing. Even though it was seen as avant-garde and an anomaly, and for entertainment purposes only, the information that was received by those readers was coming from the other side. So the merchants that were there asking questions on behalf of their wives and families were in fact receiving real answers to their questions, and these were answers that tracked and resonated. And because of that, that was when tarot at that time had in fact graduated into the noble society. So tarot took a stronghold at this time, and it was no longer associated as something that only happened with traveling merchants in a marketplace set up in tents. As in, tarot had arrived. And because tarot had arrived and it now had a stronghold in Italian noble society, this was also the time that the deck further expanded and the images on the cards were more polished too, to reflect the stature of the clientele. Now, this is also the time that it was shown to me readers began experimenting with different layouts. Now, the reason that the readers started to experiment with different layouts at this time was because some of the questions had graduated from yes or no and had varied away from fertility and health-related questions. So the readers wanted to have a more comprehensive overview about that person's life, so that way they could give them a more detailed answer. Now, even though tarot had arrived and it had a stronghold in Italian nobility society, it did not necessarily mean that these wives wanted their husbands to know that they were playing with tarot cards. So they frequently had tarot reading parties in their parlor with their friends over. And since the cards looked like a deck of playing cards, the cards were, if you will, hiding out in plain sight. So therefore, the tarot deck could just be passed off as a different looking deck of playing cards. Now, this is also going to align with the three-dimensional information that I acquired off of Google, which had said, yes, the cards originated in Italy in the 1400s, but that they were initially used for games and were later associated with fortune telling. So the history is actually incorrect, because what had happened is they were first used for fortune telling, but quietly, under the guise of it appearing to in fact have been a deck of playing cards. So the readings were no longer clandestine events that were happening in a market in a tent, but akin to what we would today consider a woman throwing a Botox party in her house. It's essentially where one woman hosts a bunch of her friends over, she has an injector, and you all do your beauty together. So if you're all doing something together and it's more out in the open, it takes the stigma away from something. And then it's no longer hidden, but it's more accepted and acceptable. So because the Italian women were hosting tarot parties under it being a guise of them playing cards in their parlor, all of their friends were now being introduced to tarot. And then of course their tarot card reader was being introduced to all of their friends at the party, and then that tarot card reader was getting passed around to all of their friends as well. So this is how tarot further began to expand at that time. And because the cards resembled an alternative deck of cards, that also in fact gave tarot more longevity, because it never truly had to go underground and hide, because again, it was essentially hiding in plain sight. So in a way, tarot in fact began to gain popularity at that time as it started to travel around Europe. And it could avoid being labeled witchcraft, which was something that could land the reader in a dungeon or beheaded for practicing witchcraft. But because the deck already resembled a deck of playing cards, it really grew legs, gained popularity, and traveled because it was hidden in plain sight. And because anyone who did not know what the cards were would look at them and think it was just some sort of an alternative deck of playing cards that the nobility used to use. And of course, the nobility would protect their tarot readers, so in fact, really none was the wiser. So tarot continued to expand and expand and expand. And here we are in today's day and age where tarot is not really considered to be all that fringe any longer. So again, we're in 2025 right now, and something that was received through divine inspiration and that one man chose to act on all the way back in the 1200s has serious longevity. And if you yourself have stayed this long and you're still here, and maybe you're still on the fence about tarot, and you're wondering, is it bad for you? Well, I have previously been asked that very same question for an AMA. However, that segment is tucked away in one of my many various AMAs, so I'm just going to answer that question again here. No. Tarot is neither good nor bad. It just is. I'm also going to remind you that the information that comes in does in fact come from the other side. But having said that, the intention and the vibration of the reader that you get a reading from is in fact something that does matter. Because, as I have previously shared, anytime one connects to the other side, without seeing what it is they are connecting to, how do we know if they have a high or low vibe guide on the other side? We don't. And we, of course, cannot know that which we cannot see. But because everything of a three-dimensional nature has either a soul, spiritual, energetic, or vibrational element comprising what we ourselves see in the 3D material world, just look at the reader themselves. As in, what vibe do you get from them? And if it's not a good vibe, maybe reconsider getting a reading from that particular person. Also, was this particular reader recommended to you from a friend? What's the vibration of that particular friend? Because I remind you, like attracts like. So if you have a slightly low vibe friend, what's that going to say about the vibration of a reader that they themselves align with? Also, when choosing a tarot reader or any psychic reader at all, ask yourself if this person has good hygiene. Because believe it or not, it matters. Because poor three-dimensional hygiene may also lend itself to poor energetic or spiritual hygiene. And lastly, perhaps inquire what deck the reader uses, because this too matters. Because, as my longtime viewers and specifically my channel members know, Aleister Crowley invented his own tarot deck. So Aleister Crowley's specific deck does have satanic elements infused into it, even if it's just with the energy and intention of it, but it could also certainly be with the artwork as well. And that could certainly influence the energy of a reader that is using that particular deck. Because, as I always say, energy is everything, and that is certainly the case with tarot as well. So that concludes my energy reading into the true history and origin of tarot cards. I hope that you guys have enjoyed this reading, perhaps found it to be insightful or thought-provoking. If you yourself have ever had a tarot reading and you would like to share your experience, please do comment down below. And this is where I'm also going to remind you to please take what resonates, leave the rest behind, and as always, and until next time, stay in that high vibration, because energy is everything.